very, very young. He was probably about 5 or 6 when King Stephen was held up in a castle. And King Stephen, or rather, let me start over. King Stephen had a marshal, which was John Marshall. John Marshall did not agree with King Stephen of England of the 12th century. So John Marshall deflected and he went over to Matilda's side of the army. So John Marshall took him and his knights, started fighting with Queen Matilda against King Stephen that he was once a companion of. John Marshall was held up at a castle at one point. And King Stephen heard that he was in a particular castle, a Newbury castle to be specific. And so King Stephen brought his army and charged forth to bring John Marshall to justice because he was unhappy with him. He wanted to exact vengeance upon him. And so through this process, as King Stephen got to this castle, there's a few ways you can defeat a castle. Who here has any idea how you can defeat a castle? Yes, sir? Huh? Breach in the walls, so tear the walls down. Yes, sir? Use the siege tower, yes, very effective.
Siege down.
Yep. Catapults, very good. Yep. Battering rams, could work. Yep. Tanks? They didn't have tanks back then. Cannons? They actually did have cannons way back then. Surprisingly enough, but not was around.
They probably didn't do this, but the Egyptians would dig under their walls and basically make the entire place flat.
They did do that, actually. Yeah, there is. So there was a lot of different ways. Another way that you could also take over a castle is to starve out the inhabitants. The people inside only had so much water, they only had so much food. And after that, they would starve to death. And so they would give up. So any way that you could take over a castle would take anywhere from 6 months to years to overtake it. You could not overtake a castle in one day. John Marshall knew this. So John Marshall quickly sent out of his castle a bunch of people to get food, to get supplies, to resupply the castle so that they could have a long engagement. However, as he sent these people out, John Marshall went outside to talk to King Stephen, and he had his son, William Marshall, with him. And John Marshall told King Stephen, he said, look, I'm going to give you the castle. It's yours. But there's some details we need to work out. We need to make sure we're on the same page, that when I give it to you, everything is okay. So, King Stephen was still a little bit apprehensive. John Marshall said, look, I tell you what, Stephen, take my son, William Marshall. When I give you the castle, you can give me my son back. So Stephen said, okay, this seems like a fair trade. So that happened. Time passed, and John Marshall did not give up the castle. More time passed, John Marshall still did not give up the castle. More time passed, and Stephen sent word to John Marshall saying, look, give me the castle by noon today, or else I'm going to kill your son. John Marshall replied back with these exact words as they're accounted. He said, do what you will. I have the hammer and the anvil into which to forge even a finer son. Basically, John Marshall, who was a knight, said, kill my son. I don't care. I can have another son. So not very chivalric as we think of it today. As King Stephen's men were literally putting young William Marshall into a catapult, getting ready to hurl his body and smash it upon the castle walls, Stephen steps in and tells young William Marshall, he says, look, by my hand, no harm will come to you. Which he did protect him. Now, a year after that, a treaty came up, and long story short, there was an agreement between King Stephen and between Matilda that when King Stephen died, that Matilda would, her son, aptly named Henry II, would become King of England. They both agreed upon this, they signed a treaty, and 1 year after that treaty was signed, Stephen dies. Of natural causes. No doubt later. And so Henry II becomes king. Now, all the while that this was happening, William Marshall grew from the age of being his page, he came to the age of being a squire, and he was shipped off to his cousin's house, which was named William of Canterville. So at this point, our two key figures are William Marshall and William Canterville. Now, William Marshall, he trained in the weapons. He was a great squire. He was very effective with weapons, with all the weapons of battle. And as we go ahead and skip through time, when William Marshall became old enough, on the eve of a battle, William Marshall was knighted. The next day when battle was to come up, a particular city in England was being held captive by French knights. Now, these French knights were basically trying to overtake England. And so William Marshall, knowing that the ultimate goal was to free the inhabitants of the castle, during that battle, he charges forth on his horse, and the horse's legs get cut from under him. So somebody took a sword, cut the legs off of the horse fell, hit the ground, William Marshall fell off, broke his lance, had a lance in one hand, and he had a sword in another hand. He went forth, and he literally hacked night after night after night. Now, whether he killed them, it's unknown, but it is known that he fought so valiantly that no matter who came up against William Marshall, they ate dust. They went to the ground, and they stayed on the ground. William Marshall kept fighting and fighting, and he kept pressing the advance, to the point that the people of the town were cheering on William Marshall because they knew he was fighting for their freedom. He cared about who they were, and he cared that they were a prisoner and that they were fellow English people. However, the knights alongside William of Canterville, when they were standing back and watching these deeds that William Marshall was doing, they laughed at William. They said, "Look at what he's doing, he's a fool." William of Canterville stopped these knights and he said, "You stop right now, he's the only knight this day." Now, what makes that conversation important, what makes it significant, is the fact that a few days later there was a feast. And at this feast, William of Canterville looks to William Marshall and he says, "William Marshall, where's my gift?" And William Marshall tells William of Canterville, he says, "What gift? Whatever you want, you name it, I'll give it to you." And William of Canterville says, "Well, a horse crupper, or a horse collar, basically a horse." And William Marshall goes, "My horse died on the battlefield. I have no horse." And everybody in the entire hall wound up laughing at William Marshall. And he received his first lesson as a knight, that in order to survive as a knight, you must survive with your life, but you also must survive financially. You see, William Marshall could have taken all of those people he killed or bested. He could have taken their horse, he could have taken their armor, he could have taken those individuals ransom, but he did not. He fought for the better good. And so, knights, as we start to learn more about them, they fought more for monetary gain. They fought more for their prowess, for their ability and their skill in battle. They had to profit off of warfare, rather than just simply fight for the greater good. Knights were certainly well trained in all of this. Now, as we move through William Marshall's life, at one point William of Canterville, he could no longer afford to keep William Marshall around, or any other new knights. So he laid him off, and he told William Marshall to go to the tournaments and to win his fame and his fortune there. Well, William Marshall did go to these tournaments, and his very first tournament he won. And at the end of the tournament, when the officials were seeking out William Marshall to give him his prize, William Marshall was found at the local blacksmith shop, because his helmet had been pounded so heavily upon his head, it was literally suffocating. And the blacksmith was trying to pound out the dents in his helmet so that he could take it off and breathe and live. So, what does this tell us about tournaments? Well, not only this, but also other accounts of tournaments, is that early on, the only distinguished trait between a tournament and a battle was that tournaments had sidelines where people could not get harmed. Such as if you had a squire, he was protected and safe. They had safety zones where a knight could go to rest up, to gain his energy again and to continue fighting. However, they operated exactly like a battlefield. There were sharp weapons, they wore armor, they charged forth at each other, they held each other ransom, they made money. Everything was exactly like a normal battlefield. So early on, these tournaments were very, very chaotic, to say the least. So moving on through William Marshall.